the audit committee, subcommittee meeting to order. Welcome all those that are interested and are here and willing to sit in and keep up with this. It's pretty important as to what goes on in the rest of the commission. I hope you've had time to read over the minutes and look at them and see what you thought.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes of the Audit Subcommittee held on February the 22nd, 2011.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Good morning, Ernie.
Good morning.
Glad you made it for this one. We had a follow-up on the audit of the Palestine Laboratory Lab, and I believe they found only two small things. They've been corrected. One was that there was a no smoking sign in the old break room, and it was taken down. And then the other one seemed to be different forms of floor mats, and I think they've got that worked out, where to, which one that they need to be using. So I think Palestine Lab is clear and up front and going. I stopped by there the last time I was here. When I go by going and coming, so I stopped and visited with them, and it seemed like they had things very much in order and very busy. Oh, very busy. Just something going on. They get through one thing, they turn right to the next thing. Oh, so have y'all had a chance to look over that? Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the follow-up audit of the Palestine Laboratory as discussed.
Second.
Okay, we move on to the, Mr. Monday Rufus is supposed, well, Mr. Rufus, you need to talk to us about that.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't looking close enough. Sorry about that.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
My name is Monday Rufus, and I'm here to represent the firm of Monday and Rufus PC. My associate that normally accompanies me to commission meeting is on vacation this week, Robert Gonzalez. We reviewed the status of our internal audit recommendation related to the Palestine State Federal Laboratory at the Texas Animal Health Commission. That was as of May 5th, 2011. The original report titled Internal Audit of the State Federal Laboratory Division Palestine was issued in 2007. We did a follow-up, and the result of our internal audit follow-up disclosed that the two recommendations that we had in 2007 have been implemented by the Commission. If you go to page 4 of the report, outlines the recommendations that we had. The finding number 1 was to enhance controls over accuracy of information generated by database containing the test results. We did some work and tested the sample size, and were able to determine that the management has implemented our recommendation. So the current status is I. That means implemented. On page 5 was a removal of smoking sign inside the laboratory building. We also did obtain necessary evidence to prove that that sign has been taken and no smoking is occurring within the building. Again, the current status on that is I. That means that it has been implemented by the management at the laboratory division within the Texas Animal Health Commission. So I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
You may explain why there should not be a no smoking sign in the rec room, the break room.
The internal auditors communicated to the Commission management about the elimination of smoking in state working facilities under Chapter 169 of House Bill 9, the regular legislative section, which became effective September 1, 2007. the legislative mandate that basically forbids smoking inside the building. So when we did the work, we noted that issue, and we made a recommendation to the management at the laboratory, and we did receive pictorial evidence showing that that sign has been taken off. So in essence, the mandate there was Chapter 169 of House Bill 988 regular legislative section.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Dice, I might note the fact that they weren't actually smoking in there. They just had never taken down the smoking sign that went back to 1955. And I will say, when it came down off the wall, you could actually see where it had been on the wall. It had been so long that the wallpaper behind it was the original color and everything else had taken right. So, if they had stopped smoking in it years ago in accordance with it, they just never removed the sign. So that was something that was pulled down.
They were preserving their wallpaper.
Decoration.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think we framed it. It was an old piece of, went back to like 1950 something.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
You know, as auditors, we work on evidence. So when we went there to do the work, we did see that sign there.
Thank you.
That was the reason that we wrote the fine.
Thank you.
We've already approved it. We probably
Yes.
don't need to again.
No, we don't need to approve it again. I was getting ahead of myself. I believe need to hear from Mr. Rufus on the audit for the consumable supplies.
We evaluated the consumable supplies inventory processes at the Texas Animal Health Commission. That was as of March 22nd, 2011. The results of our evaluation disclose that the Commission has controls in place to manage consumable supplies inventory activity. If we go to page 5 of the report, it outlines the specific controls that we believe were in place when we did the work. We did note that the Commission is currently revising the Staff Services Department Policies and Procedures Manual for procuring supplies, inventories, fixed assets, professional and personal services. We also did note that there was segregation of duties at point of ordering and receiving consumable supply inventory within the Commission. The consumable supply requests are approved by area regional offices, lab directors, management, headquarters, with copies of supporting documentation being kept at the location. There are also dollar amount threshold approval required on purchases made by the Commission. In order to ensure safety in the disposal of consumable supplies containing hazardous ingredients or chemical characteristics, the lab offices use material safety data sheet at the disposal of these items. The rented storage facility building appear to have adequate security with security cameras and an iron gate, which requires a code from tenants to open. However, we did identify a couple of issues. One has to do with the sale and disposition of supplies and salvage property. The Commission supplies surplus furniture, outdated computer items, and salvage are being stored in the Commission's headquarters warehouse and 3 rented mini storage rooms. According to the Comptroller's Office, the state property accounting manual, surplus property is property of a state that exceeds the state agency needs. It's not required for the foreseeable future and has adequate useful life, has been designated by the agency as surplus. But we did note that based on House Bill 1, the 80th Legislature Regular Session, Article 9, Section 8, 104, 25% of the proceeds from the surplus property may be reappropriated during the fiscal year they are received for expenditures from the appropriation, from which like property, equipment, and commodities may be purchased. In essence, what we're saying is that items that are not being used should be disposed of according to the state requirements. So the recommendation is that the Commission should consider reviewing the usefulness of the property item taking up needed storage space in the commission's headquarters warehouse and rented storage needs. A determination should be made as to whether the property items are being used, considered surplus, obsolete, and salvage. In essence, if it's not being used and is there, the commission should do something about it. If it's obsolete, do something to try to dispose of the items. But the key thing there is disposing of the items in compliance with the comptroller's office requirements. And the management has responded to our recommendation, and they will do something about it. Finding number 2 is the protection of items in the rental facility. So we did a physical inspection of the rented mini storage rooms, and we did note that rainwater continues to leak on the consumable supplies inventory, equipment, fixed asset items inside the storage rooms. So recommending that the commission consider taking appropriate steps to ensure that consumable supplies inventory, equipment, and fixed asset items stored in rental facilities are adequately protected from water elements. In essence, if we have those items in the storage facility, there should be a system in place to ensure that those items are protected from water damage. Again, the management responded to a recommendation and indicated that they would do something to rectify the situation. I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions that you may have.
I do see that someone was hired back in December to take this responsibility. And I believe they've already begun to disperse of some of the items and maybe even be able to give up one of the storage rooms.
Okay.
So I was well pleased with the report that I found here, and maybe the storage room they give up will be the one that's leaking water. So maybe it'll solve all of our problems. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the audit of consumable supplies as discussed.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. The motion carries. Do you have anything else you'd like to bring before us?
Don't have anything else. However, I did during the next commission meeting, there would be an approval of internal audit charter. There were changes as internal auditor for the agency. We are required to comply with government auditing standards, and also we are required to comply with the Institute of Internal Auditors standards. They made quite a few changes that are effective in 2011. So that would need a change in the internal audit charter for the agency. The internal audit charter basically spells out the responsibilities of the internal auditor and also the responsibilities of the agency as a whole. I did email that to Mr. Snelson, and hopefully we'll be discussing that at the next commission meeting.
Okay.
All right.
And you can keep us informed as to.
Yes, yeah, that's something I'll put on for the next one, for which we'll update the standards that he goes by to hold, making in accordance with the change in the law, so.
Good.
All right.
We
Thank you.
appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have some public comments that they'd like to make concerning the audit?
I'm sorry.
Just public comment. Anything else you want to add?
No, ma'am, but I did want to acknowledge too, Kathy Griffin, she's the one that's coming over to replace Felix and taking over the shop that'll be over consumable supplies. And we're very lucky to have her. She is very well organized and has already set about doing a multiplicity of things that'll help make us not only more efficient, but better serve the agency's folks, reduce the risk, and help that we can do our job well. So I think she's going to be a great asset.
Thank you. Kathy, it's good to have you on board.
Welcome.
Any more comments, public comments about the audit report? Y'all have anything you want
No, ma'am.
to comment on?
Madam Chair, I move for adjournment.
All those in favor? Aye. So at this time, we'll call the audit.
Doesn't matter if you agree or disagree. I make a motion second, it's 2 against 1. You're beat.
Well, I will declare this meeting adjourned.
She might call us back into session. Call us back in.
See, you weren't even adjourned and you doing all that.
You're beat.
I got a
Not
feeling
fair,
that.
2 against 1.
We'd look kind of foolish if we voted against something we'd moved and
I don't know
seconded.
how else to handle it.
That's the
you
way
know?
you're supposed to handle it.
That's the way you-
It is.
Good morning.
Morning.
I would like to welcome everybody here to Austin this morning for our 379th commission meeting. I'd like to move to item 2 to approve the minutes of the 378th meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the minutes of the commission meeting held on February 22nd, 2011.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the 378th meeting. Any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Dr. Ellis will now come up and give us a report of the Executive Director on significant disease programs, activities, so on and so forth. Good morning, Dr. Ellis.
Morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. How are y'all today? Glad everyone could make it. My first item on here is on budget, and I'm gonna just kind of slip over that because there's another section on the budget. So if I'd have been thinking, I wouldn't have put as much. I would have just said there's another section on the budget. But I'll just give you some general comments on the budget process and the session from my perspective. And it's just main thing is it's not over yet. We still got some bills out there, both final passage of our budget per se, and then some fee authority. With or without a limit on the amount of fees to offset the general revenue that's been reduced. As I told you all at the last meeting, it's been reduced by over 40%. And just at the macro level, you know, the whole state is caught up in a combination of a change of philosophy to smaller, leaner government, and also just a budget problem, obviously, that y'all are all aware of, so I'm not going to belabor that. But so we're at the agency level, we are caught up in a process bigger than us, and at the state level, and then at the agency level, there are some issues, just some specific politics, so to speak, going on with our elected officials. And I want to thank all of our industry folks for their support, and thank all of you commissioners that have been involved as well and helping me through this first session. So I'll stop with that on the budget, and we'll talk about it in detail in the next thing. So I'll just go on to my regular report, unless you want to have any specific questions right now. I'll just talk about it in a minute, if that's all right. Brucellosis, and again, Dr. Schwartz is going to come up in a minute as our state epi, assistant state vet, and give you a little more detail on some of these disease things. But we did finish the brucellosis case down in Starr County, and I'm very proud of our agency. We responded as a task force. It was a partnership with USDA Veterinary Services and Dr. Varner's folks. The location was very close to one of our tick quarantine areas, and we were able to scratch ticks and bleed cattle for brucellosis at the same time and do it all within 30 days, and we treated it like a foreign animal disease, and that's the way it'll be from now on, assuming we have the resources to do that. And we didn't find any more infection, didn't find the source of infection. We did find Brucella abortus in feral swine and the samples that were taken, which is somewhat concerning in a way. We're still trying to analyze what that means and talk to some other folks at A&M and places about the implications of feral swine and the spread of brucellosis, both the cattle strain and the swine strain. So this was cattle brucellosis in hogs. And what I usually am telling y'all about is hog brucellosis is causing us problems in cattle. And so we're seeing some things going on here that we can't explain. And maybe Dr. Schwartz will have a little better thought on that. And I think there's obviously the need for some research as we move forward on this with appropriate partners at the federal level and also the state level or academic level. Animal disease traceability. We still don't have a rule out. They told us to be out in April. Here we are, end of May, it's still not out. I believe them that it's coming soon. I don't think there's going to be any surprises in it. For those of y'all that are engaged, you know what it's going to say. And it's going to say if you cross the state line, you got to have a tag, and they're going to weigh feeder cattle and slaughter cattle, at least initially, hold states accountable for traceability standards. And I think they're looking at fiscal year 13 funds right now. The 11-12 budget it's not, implementation is not going to be there yet. So fiscal year 13 for the Fed starts in October of 12. But if there's cooperative agreements, we usually get them in April of the next year. So you're looking at probably 2 years. We're still, I think, 2 years away. And as I've said before, our challenge is going to be computer issues, to be quite honest with you. We're going to have to go to electronic health certificates. And we're going to have to go to test documents and health certificates that automatically enter the test data and the ear tag data into computers where we don't have to use data entry to do that. And I don't know how to do that. We don't have the people or the money right now. So we'll see what the feds come up with funding-wise. They have picked a software company. The first phase for them is to transfer the existing computer data on test and vaccination records for TB and brucellosis, which was in our old generic database. And right now in our field offices, our admin techs there, they enter some data. There's also data entered here with our data entry folks in this office and remotely, and USDA also enters data. So there's 3 different processes in the generic database, and there's literally millions and millions and millions of test records. And so the first step is the USDA's picked this software company out of Ireland to change the old computer information into the beginning of the new computer information. And that's underway. And I just told Texas, them Texas didn't want to go first. So we've learned that. You don't want to be the first one when they do computer changes. So we're going last, I hope. And we are the biggest, and obviously, but I think we're probably within a year, we'll see that transformation in our data, and then we'll move forward from there. And then, of course, the next thing is to determine, is that the company that will handle the traceability issues, because each state and industry will have to have a way to track animals when they move across the state line. And this will just be a bookend approach. You give them a tag, or they get their own tag, and then if it goes to slaughter, it gets collected. And if we need it, we just have to connect the dots in between. That's how simple it's going to be. And they claim it'll be not an unfunded mandate. So in theory, if the federal funds fall apart, it could be that will delay or weaken the implementation of this. So I think it's less than more right now, and so we'll just take it as it comes. We have plenty of time there. TB, bovine tuberculosis, the main thing there is some national rulemaking underway that they've combined the TB and the brucellosis rules. They've suspended statuses, as y'all know, for both TB and brucellosis. Right now we're free, and they haven't suspended that we're free. They've just suspended altering the statuses. So even if we found a bunch of cases, I don't think they would change our status right now while they're considering these rules. I've been involved in the rules, as well as Dr. Mahalki, our regional director in the Hempstead office at the national level. And there's going to be 4. They've got those rules out for comment. They're available on our website. There's links there. We can give you a hard copy while y'all are here if you want to look at it. They're not perfect. I'm not even sure I like them, and I was part of it. And so, but it was a large group of 30 or 40 people, and so we just had one vote. And there's some things that I definitely don't like, especially with indemnity. The proposal in there is that there's not a guarantee that you...
To talk a little bit about item number 4 and 5. As y'all know, this for infected or herds or exposed animals, it says things like if money's available and if you follow the rules, and I think we have some real heartburn with that, with required government taking of property without funds, and so there's going to be some issues there. A lot of focus on regionalization, which is really driven by Michigan Wildlife and the Yellowstone brucellosis program. So we'll see how it works out. There's going to be 4 public meetings. One will be in Amarillo, and I will speak at that on June 6th. And I would encourage y'all or any of the stakeholder groups to at least make comments, if not come to that meeting, and take a look at that, because it's significant changes and there's still a lot of work to be done. And the rule is not as well developed as even the animal ID rule was, and I think it's going to have to go back to the drawing board for some more work. And so your comments are going to be very important for each industry. Trichomoniasis, we have a separate agenda item on that, and we had a working group meeting about 3 weeks ago, and it went very well. Commissioner Locke led that, and I think that program's on track as well as it can with the resources we have and with it being a new program, and I'll talk about that in a minute.
Lab system, just mentioned, Dr. Swartz is actually the director of the lab system, and he may have some thoughts here, but we've got a number of issues going on with our lab system, including our director retired last week, Dale Preston, so we're in the process of doing some personnel evaluation and changes there. We did get approval to start running an equine infectious anemia test at our laboratory, and for our own blood test, mainly what we're going to do there is if we're testing horses for pyroplasmosis now, we're going to run EIA on those horses, and it'll be a lot cheaper for us to do it. We can run it for cents instead of dollars, and so we're going to take a hard look at what we believe are at-risk populations of horses exposed to pyro, which may have a Mexican connection. A lot of times we're seeing a tendency there may be AIA, so we're going to start running EIA, our own employees' blood, no outside blood there. Also trying to get final approval on pseudorabies status, NALN status from the feds, and some other things going on there with our lab system, and Dr. Swartz may have some more comments on that. Equine herpes virus 1, I keep thinking there's no more diseases we have no clue what we're doing with, and I'm not going to say we're clueless on equine herpes, but we were not experienced as an agency or as a nation, to be quite honest. And so we've been in close consultation with our other state vets and with the federales, the USDA folks, on guidance. This is a very complex disease. It's a herpes virus of horses. It doesn't affect people, but it's a complex diagnostic issue. It's hard. You can have infected horses with no symptoms and horses with symptoms that aren't infected, and vaccine can complicate it, and it kills horses, and it's a very emotional issue. And we did have an outbreak situation in a national cutting horse event in Ogden, Utah. So we had a point source infection, point source spread of infection that went all over the United States. High visibility, and we're working through that. We did have an EHV1 plan, absolutely, for racetracks. Dr. Swartz and our staff had just finished that. Texas had dodged that bullet so far, and so we were prepared for a racetrack outbreak of this, but this is just a general spread of some disease from another state. Texas had about 25 horses exposed, and we have about 300 under hold order right now for this disease. May start turning some of them loose, but very complicated issue. The thing we've learned here, mainly my only point, I don't want to go into any details, I'll let Andy do that, is, you know, the horse industry is out there, and we can go a long time without a lot of interaction, but when we do have an issue with horses, it's important, and it affects, has a fiscal impact and economic impact to the state and to the industry, and we need to strengthen as a state our ability to communicate. Texas is a state that doesn't have a horse council. We found this when we tried to talk to the horse industry about pyroplasmosis. Who are they? Who do you talk to? A lot of states have a horse council, which is just a formalized group of all the different segments of the equine industry. And so I'd like to work with Commissioner Wheelis and some other industry folks across the state and see if we can get this going. I'm not sure it's up to the Animal Health Commission to form it, but we want to help see if we can revitalize some interest in that, because right now there's not a real good way to talk to the horse industry. And this was a disease that we needed to get information out on fairly quickly on whether people should go to events and what the issues were. The good news is we found the value of social media, and I tell you what, our Facebook went crazy this last week. We went from 300 friends to 2,100 friends in 5 days. 5 days, 2,000 people signed up to get information from us on Facebook, and I want to thank Bonnie and Lisa, our PIO folks, for running that. And it's a new challenge because it's interactive, it's immediate, and but it's been a very good tool for us. Obviously, we're still using the website and email and all those other things, but I think we validated that that's an important new part of public information, and the horse industry is right in the middle of that, and so we'll continue. And if any of y'all if you're not on Facebook, you don't even have to be a member. You can just go to our website and click on the F button, and you can see what it looks like, and you can see the chats and the people on there, and it's amazing who our partners. And basically, we partnered with most of our stakeholder organizations, are now our friends, so to speak. And so that's the one good thing that's come out of this. But, you know, for the last week, to be honest, we spent most of our time here in Austin on this issue. This is a very important issue, the horse industry, and I've done a number of press releases, so has Dr. Swartz, and a number of messaging going out and a lot of conference calls. And it's a disease that we're still learning about, but we think we might have turned the corner on this specific outbreak. Cattle fever ticks, this is good news. I have mainly good news for y'all here today. We released 1/3 of the southernmost tick temporary quarantine last week, which is down around Rio Grande City. We constricted that by 59,000 acres to less than 100,000. We have 3 zones: Carrizo, and then Zapata, and then Rio Grande City. We're in the final days of finalizing the release of the northernmost blanket, the Carrizo Springs blanket, and that's going to be completely released, and there'll just be a couple premises and some private owners that are going to stay under for a little more work. So the bottom one has been reduced. The top one in our map is going to be released probably next week, and then Dr. Schwartz is going down Thursday to look at the Zapata one, and we may be able to reduce that a little bit as well. That's going to be problematic because of some deer issues long term, but all 3 of our that's going to be problematic because of some deer issues long term, but all 3 of our blanket quarantine zones either have been or will be reduced in size within the next 6 weeks for sure. So that's really good news, and it's a reflection of the hard work by the veterinary service folks and Dr. Varner's tick force, and our folks are down there helping as well, and just the cooperation of the industries, the local ranchers, and then the cattle, the cattle raisers and the independent cattlemen and the Farm Bureau and the folks at the state and national level that have helped us with funding and just support throughout the last few years. We think we're on the right track. There's still the research down there's a little slower than we'd like, but we're going through the hoops, and I believe within a year and a half, we'll be able to have maybe a vaccine and a treatment in the ivermectin treated molasses that we can put in that quarantine zone along the river. Combine that with some identification and maybe some little more systematic checking of all the premises to make sure they all get looked at, and I think we could have a really good buffer zone and for a while at least knock this back to normal low levels. So we're optimistic in that regard, and I think it's good news. Border port issues, again, we're working closely with USDA on this, and I give veterinary services a lot of credit for working well with our Texas industry, the feeder industry, and the cattle industry in general to come up with some ways to keep Mexican feeders primarily crossing through the 3 ports that are closed at Laredo, Pharr, and Eagle Pass. There's still a lot of challenges there. One of our, some of them are related to money, and there may be some reevaluation of the location of the Eagle Pass facility. USDA's taking some bids and looking around to see if there's a more effective way to run that one. But the bottom line is they're keeping cattle commerce moving. And again, Chairman Morales has been instrumental in helping with this as well, and some of the local folks down there. So this is good news right now. The temporary sites are working until the border violence subsides. We have a process that's manageable, and we'll continue to be involved in that. Swine brucellosis, really good news. I should have said this first, actually, Commissioner Real. We got our swine-free status. We were the last state, and I don't know how many years this has been going on, but a long, long time. And what this means is all 50 states are now free of swine brucellosis. Primarily this is related to the commercial industry, and it allows commercial swine to move with less or no restrictions. Obviously we still have brucellosis in our feral swine population, but our commercial folks have been free for many, many years. We were finally able to meet all the criteria that were required to get state status. USDA granted us that status last week, and I don't know, Commissioner Real, if you want to say anything, but this is really good news for the swine industry.
First off, it was great news. I want to compliment the Animal Health Commission on their perseverance. Dr. Schwartz, Dr. Ellis, it's been a long battle in the swine industry. Is very appreciative of finally getting this accomplished. So again, thank you very much for your help.
I do have 2 waivers to report. One's trichomoniasis related, and it was a really good buck and bull of the year. 3 or 4 years ago, it was found to be infected with trich, and obviously a lot of these good buck and bulls are breeding bulls, and this one is actually retired now. And rather than kill it, they asked if they could donate it to Auburn University to do some research for possible treatment. And I allowed that. I told them the bull can go to Auburn, but it's probably not going to be able to come back because there's no real validated way to prove it's treatable. But they want to do research, so we let it go, and I guess that's where it went. It left under permit, and the Alabama State vet was willing to take it. So we had a buck and bull go to Alabama for trich treatment instead of slaughter for research, and we had a brucellosis waiver, and you can see there 4 African water bucks needed to come in on a 34-day negative test instead of 30, and I don't remember ever having heard of African water bucks under quarantine for brucellosis, and coming from a free state, and anyway, allowed them to come on in. So those are my 2 waivers, and that's the end of this report. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Dr. Ellis? I think if you look at those last few pages of his report, you kind of see all of the appearances and all of the places that he needs to be, and it keeps him very, very, very busy. But these are things that we need to be present at. Do I have a motion?
I would like to ask a question. I see here where the lab director retired. Is there prospects for another?
We're going to, I don't want to break any rules as far as employment. We're going to post that job internally first and take a look at our other lab directors and see if they're interested. We have 4 labs. And so we have some experienced employees, and we've asked them if they're interested to let us know, and we're going to evaluate our internal candidates first. And if not, then we'll post it externally. And it's, with the budget the way it is right now, we'll probably just temporarily, we'll just appoint someone an interim director while we see what the budget looks like, and then we will refill it. But it's to be honest, we're going to have to see what the budget is.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the actions of the Executive Director from the period of February 22nd through May 24, 2011.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the actions of the Executive Director. Is there any further discussion? None. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I'd like to talk a little bit about item number 4 and 5. As y'all know, this budget process is still a moving target, so to speak. Things change on a daily basis. At the time we were putting this agenda together, we wanted to keep as much flexibility as we could, assuming that things were finished in Austin on the Hill, and they're not. So some of these action items I am not going to take any action on. Dr. Ellis would like to comment a little bit on the legislative fees and budgets. He can. I think he's already said a few words on that, Dr. Ellis, but a motion's not going to be required for this item.
Well, some of y'all have been very involved in the budget, and maybe some not quite as much, so I'll just give you a brief recap to make sure we're all on the same page. And basically what happened this year was the Legislative Budget Board, which the leaders of that are the Senate Finance Chair, the Lieutenant Governor, and the House Appropriations Chair, and then there's some other elected officials. I think there's 10 total, run a staff of people that are basically accountants and auditors that set preliminary budget recommendations for each state agency. And what on the surface looks like a cut in our budget is more complex than that, because it's not only a recommended cut to our budget, but it's a change in the way the agency is funded, from 95% general revenue, or just money the state gives the agency, to about 60% general revenue and approximately 40% fee-based, depending ultimately on how the legislation comes out, what we have approval to raise in fees, and then what you as commissioners determine is a fair amount of fees to be run. So we're seeing a reduction, and we're seeing a change in the way we're funded, and that's why you may have already heard other state agencies have made layoffs and made decisions and cut programs, and some of those were actually directed to cut this program or to cut that program. The LBB didn't tell us to stop doing anything. They just said, we're not going to give you as much money, and if you want the money back, you got to figure out how to raise fees. That was kind of the end of the discussion right there. We're still in that, as Chairman Morales said. It's still not over, because there's still bills out there with fee authority. We don't have the authority we feel is necessary to have all the options to raise equitable fees, and there's still the possibility of a cap on the amount of fees. One day it's the cap, the next day there's not a cap, and that's just politics, and we'll just have, I'm just going to wait to see. When it happens at this point. What have we done so far? Well, in this biennium, the agency already reduced our budget by 12.5%. as directed by the legislature. So that's about really like, about $1.5 million we took out of our budget already in these 2 years, fiscal year 10-11. We have been positioning ourselves since I came on board to soften any potential layoffs. We knew there's a budget problem, and so through attrition and retirements, we've really we've reduced our employee numbers from well over 200 to we're at 178 right now. Our FTE cap was 214. When we started the session, we're down 30 people already, so there's a 15 or 16% reduction, and we realize we may have to cut some more people, and we've had we're basically right now have a hiring freeze on except for critical positions. I can give you an example. We had 2 computer help desk people. When your computer breaks, one of them quit, went to another agency. Well, that's critical. One guy can't help us all 178 people with computer issues, so we're refilling that's the kind of position we're refilling. But we're sitting on most others. We're going to evaluate our retirements. And we do have some significant retirements. Dr. Lenarduzzi, our regional director in Beeville, is retiring. He was acting executive director between Logan and Hillman. He's announced his retirement. Obviously, Dale, the lab director, is retired. Dave Tompkins, our emergency coordinator, retired Friday. So we're seeing some significant retirements, and to be honest, and part of it is the political climate and the uncertainty in the budget. And some of these folks just want to retire, and others are, there's people are looking around, and so we'll deal with it, and that's my job to make sure we don't lose our tradition of service and our historical base of providing quality service to the industries with new people that we have to hire back. So we have a budget. The budget that was proposed by the LBB actually was passed out of both the House and the Senate. The final budget's not finished yet, but instead of getting about $10.5 million in general revenue, it says you're going to get $6.14 million in general revenue. And so we believe, because on both sides that's the same, it's most likely, it's always possible there can be a late amendment. Our budget is probably more formally finished than the fee authority bill, which is out there. There's 3 different versions. There's a Senate version, there's 2 House versions. They keep coming up and down. This one's in first place, this one's in last, this one's dead, this one's alive, and that's the political arena. We believe we will get the authority in the next few days to evaluate new revenue streams, if you so choose to do that, such things as lab fees at our lab and at other labs. That's one of the things. Another example would be if we wanted to charge to administer a program like the chronic wasting disease statuses that our regions work with dear folks right now. We can't charge for that, and it takes up a lot of our time. Basically, our only options right now are inspection fees. The proposed the fees that are on for y'all to consider today for passage are fees that fee authority you already had: inspections, health certificates, and file registration. That's basically all we had right now as an agency. So when we see the new fee authority bill, the final language, then we'll take a look at that, and you guys can decide what that means and what do you want to do next. And I think it's going to happen. What this is going to mean is really you're probably going to have to come back and have another meeting sooner than you normally would. Any new fee authority that's is implemented that generates revenue, as y'all know, you got to have 2 meetings, and so many days in between for comments, and then so many days after that for it to go into effect. And obviously our budget would take effect September 1, and right now, any state money that the agency has to go back. That's not going to be a problem for us. We're going to zero our budget out probably in July. We still don't have any federal funds for fiscal year 11. We haven't received any money from USDA, which is 30% of our budget. And the bottom line is we're going to run out of money. I don't know what we will do if they don't pay us. I guess we'll figure it out, go to the governor or something. But we're floating a loan to USDA. Now, with that said, they claim they're going to give us some money. We have 11 cooperative programs, including animal disease traceability and brucellosis and TB and foreign animal disease and scrapie and avian influenza and on like that. And so and the way that works is there's maybe not 11, but there's 9 or 10 different USDA employees in charge of those, and some come from regions, some come from Riverdale, and some are ahead of the others, but we are about 6 weeks away from a fiscal crisis if we don't get some money. But the bottom line is we can't carry state money over, but we can carry the federal money over because it's a fiscal year thing. So I think we'll be okay there. I just want to let you know that that's still looming out there, that we have not been paid by USDA for anything, including first point testing, brucellosis money, and that's $25,000 a week right there. So make sure I hadn't missed anything here in the notes, because so the passage, you're going to see passage of rules that you already had authority to do. The proposed fees are, just as the Chairman said, just for y'all's discussion at this point. There's not an action necessary. We need to wait on the final handouts. What I did put in your books were some different, if and when the commission gets to considering fees, there's different levels of fees. I mean, literally you can do whatever you want, but the first one shows you the level of fee authority that LBB suggested was reasonable for the agency, and they actually came and spent quite a bit of time looking at what we did. They went out on field trips, and their recommendation was $4.4 million per year, $8.8 million biennially, that they said the agency could collect in fees to recoup the reduction in general revenue. So there's the first page has that box around what looks to, you see the fee number of $4.4 million. That's just giving you an example. If that were the goal selected, then down below there you can see what our first take at how much each industry would probably approximately have to pay. We took a look at the industry. We took a look at what our agency does interactively with the species that we regulate two ways. One is how much time we spend with each species, and one's how much money we spend with each species. And they were just, I mean, and I'm open if y'all got a better way to figure it out, we'll try it. But what we basically did was average the two together to come up with some reasonable, and as you can see, it looks like about 2/3 of our time we're working with cattle issues. 10% horses, a little less than 10 on hogs and poultry and sheep and goats and exotics. That's not exactly, that's a historical going back, I think, how many years did we go back? Y'all remember, Matt, was that 8? You went back to 03 or 05? Do you remember? Anyway, it's historical. So we average that. I can give you an example. For the last week, I would say I've spent 75% of my time on horse issues. And that's the challenge, and Dr. Schwartz has probably spent 100%. That's the challenge with our agency as the animal health entity to support all industries. When you are needed, you have to respond, and that's really, I think that's the message I want to leave y'all with before you begin to consider fees is you can reduce us any way you want, and for months or years at times you can get away with not needing to do an avian influenza response or a horse response, but when we're needed, the expectations are they're there. So we do, in my opinion, need to maintain a baseline workforce that can respond to normal duties and the extra duties as well. The second page, I just outlined a box that showed, because at one time, there may still be out there, there was one of our bills had a cap of $3 million a year or $6 million a biennium on how many fees the commission could implement if they chose. And you can see the lesser amount down at the bottom of that, what each species would in theory be asked to provide to support the agency. That to me is with a $3 million fee, we would need to lay off about 30 more folks, probably another 15 to 20% of the agency. I'm not sure we could survive. My goal is what I'm just trying to make sure we do, if at all possible, is keep a market inspector at every market. And I'm not even sure we could do it there, but we'll deal with whatever we get. But I want to let y'all know that doesn't mean that's a recommendation. That's actually the worst case scenario where we might still be effective. We may not be, and especially if we were to have simultaneous a big TB dairy get infected and find, I don't know, some bad disease in some other industries, we literally would not be able to respond. Our fallback is USDA and their veterinarians and their animal health technicians, and we're going to do more partnering with them, but the truth is they're taking bigger cuts than we are. So I don't think we can depend upon USDA to fill in the gaps, and we don't want to depend on USDA to provide the leadership for task force and statewide disease responses if we had a foot and mouth or something bad. You want the Animal Health Commission to have folks in the managerial roles in the slots as much as possible running the field operations, and that's the risk we'll take if our cuts are too significant to the agency. And And obviously, it would be 2 more years before we'd have any hope of getting any of that back if the economy turns around. The last page is just some detailed breakdown of the fees that we've already y'all have already kind of thought were reasonable and doable, and so we just went ahead and applied what we believe would be achievable, and that shows you what would be left for each industry to try and raise. And you can see some industries would be more easily amenable to those fees than others, and that's where I believe Chairman Morales probably want to talk to you all about. It's going to take the leadership of each commissioner working with their industries, and at some level it's not even necessarily appropriate for my staff and myself to be involved. We obviously will be there to facilitate, but we're certainly not. I don't want to get into anybody's business. I'll be glad to answer questions, and I'll be glad to tell you what it means, this or that, and what I think, whether something will work or not. But I hope that when we come to this point, we from the staff perspective, we need each commissioner to help with their specific industry. So, and the last thing I'll just mention is, we're going to have to hire some people to collect money. That will be at the expense of someone else. If I have a cap on people, or a literal cap because I don't have the money, then I'm going to have to replace a field person with an accountant. There's going to be some software that's needed to track money. And truthfully, it's something we don't do, and we don't even know how to do. We're going to have to hire some outside folks and probably go interact with some other agencies and just to find out how to make this work. So this is not something we can do in a couple of days or a couple of weeks. I put 60-day lead time here. It's probably longer than that. We probably need 90 days, and that's why I'm saying if and when the budget smoke clears, y'all may need to come back pretty quickly and start deliberating on any rulemaking that's needed. My understanding is you can consider rules or even pass rules without the authority, but then they won't start until you get the authority, which is going to be September 1st. But on September 1, if we're dependent upon fees and we're not collecting those fees, then every day we go without fees, we're running backwards in our budget, our ability to hit our budget. And so it's a complicated situation. It's obviously unpleasant. No one wants to do it. General revenue would still be the first and best hope for the agency. I don't believe we should be funded by fees, but they didn't ask me. So with that, I'll be glad to answer questions, and just thank y'all in advance, and thank our industry supporters again. The guys sitting out here in the room are the ones that have been behind us so far in the political process, and we want to make sure we do what's right and fair, but at the same time, I hope we can maintain an agency that's a viable entity for all species to do what's needed to be done. Yes, sir.
Dr. Ellis, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding the visual depictions you've given us here, so that when I do speak to some of the folks in my industry, I'm not putting out erroneous information. When we have our breakdown between the species and their corresponding percentage of contribution anticipated towards the budget, this is based upon the percentage of time your staff is concentrating on that specific industry.
Time and money, which are not necessarily the same things.
No,
but
certainly.
we averaged them together, and then you're pretty dang close, to be quite honest with you.
Then I think if we're spending most of our time on one area, then that one area has to pick up a equivalent part of the budget. Thank you. I understand now.
What I would like to add, kind of reiterate what Dr. Ellis is up against. It's something that he and I have been working with very closely, and again, I'd like to give our appreciation to all our industry partners who have been very supportive, but at the end of the day, we don't know how many fees we can raise. We don't know whether there's going to be a cap. We don't have a budget passed. And I have a plan, and that plan is what this industry is based on, and that's industry support. And when we get these numbers and when we know where we're headed and what we have to do, kind of moving to item 5, at this time I do not want to set up a working group. I do not want to set up any subcommittees. I think it's important that Dr. Ellis and I and fellow commissioners come up with a number that we can live with to keep an effective agency working, that our industry partners can help us with, And when we get that number, then I want our individual commissioners who represent all these entities to go back and get with their industry leadership and see how we can come up with an equitable structure that can fund this agency for the next 2 years. I think it's very important that in the next legislative session we go back to general revenue funds. I think it's ridiculous that an agency like this is going to have to spend money to bring money in. A lot of the fees that we raise, being that they're fees, all of the employee benefits are going to have to come out of those fees, whereas now when you get when you're funded by general revenue fund, the state picks up that tab. If we raise $3 million in fees, a good substantial amount of that, $600,000–700,000 is going to be to pay benefits. So it's not an efficient way to run this agency, and it's very difficult to show who pays what. And these industries are great partners, but it's a very difficult process we're about to go through. So we are going to have a summer meeting probably, but before we have that meeting this summer, I want to have some decisions made with our commissioners and our industry leadership, and that way to make that meeting a more productive meeting, because we've got to have a meeting set up sometime in the summer to have proposals. Those proposals have to go and be posted in state register. Then we come back in a certain amount of time, and this is complicated, and then we approve or adopt those, and then there's time after that until they go into law, and then we have to build an infrastructure to collect these fees. So I think we need to keep it simple. I think we need to keep it fair, but I don't think we're ready today to do it, and I don't think now's the time to go through these numbers and try to discuss this, but there is a plan. The plan kind of changes as our legislators change their minds, but I will not, for that reason, I won't set up subcommittees yet, because I don't want to set up subcommittees when we don't know exactly what we're going to do. So Dr. Ellis has been working very hard. Our staff has been working very hard. This is a very tough time for this agency, but we will get through this. And to all of our industry people, and most of them are here today, appreciate your support, and we will be getting back with you because we're going to need some help. And hopefully this will be temporary help. That's my goal. And we won't have to deal with this in the next legislative session, but I will say this. If we try to raise a lot of fees, and a substantial amount of fees, next session, they're just going to try to make us raise more fees. This is a general revenue fund agency, and should stay that way in my opinion, but everybody I've talked to politically is just, when you're dealing with education, when you're dealing with some of the cuts that we're seeing out there, county agents, you're dealing with some huge cuts, it's tough to go negotiate with those folks because they've got a lot on their mind. So with that, I think it's important we move to item number 6, and I'd like for Dr. Ellis to explain to you, this will be an action item. I will entertain a motion, and I'll have Dr. Ellis explain to you why we need to do this.
Well, the discussion is on Texas Animal Health Commission's payment to livestock markets in Texas for brucellosis testing performed at the market called First Point Testing, which is part of the National Surveillance Plan and is the best way to find brucellosis in cattle. And we're talking about adult cattle sold at markets. We found 2 infected cows this calendar year, with brucellosis in 2 different markets, 2 different reasons they were infected most likely. So we do have brucellosis still around and about. Texas sale barns sell about 1 million adult cattle a year that are tested for brucellosis. The Animal Health Commission contracts directly with a livestock market owner to pay for a veterinarian to test the blood, a private veterinarian. So in other words, the Animal Health Commission gives $2 to a market, and they find a veterinarian. There are about 10 markets that don't have a vet. They have a vet tech under indirect supervision of a veterinarian. So there's either a vet or a vet tech at every market. We give them $2. Some of them, that may be all they get. If they sell a lot of cows, if it's a small market and they only have 50 or 25 or 100, they may have an agreement worked out to where they pay the guy extra, or he has a certain amount he gets just to show up, and then he gets the $2 a head. So there's all kinds of financial arrangements. Of the $2 we pay to the market owner, $1 is state money and $1 is federal money, basically to keep it real simple. We get $1.2 million per year in brucellosis cooperative funds from USDA to compensate for half of the first point testing. The other $1 million, and we sell, and they sell anywhere from $900,000 to $1.3 or $4 million, depending on whether there's a drought. That's the state money. When the federal money runs out, and if there's more cattle to be sold, it's all state money. This is a burden on the budget of the agency forever. I mean, it's impossible to budget because you never know what's going to happen in July and August with cattle runs. Right now, the cattle runs are up, and we're spending about $25,000 a week on first point testing money. So the discussion here is basically what we have is we have a contract here, and I'll pass it around, look at it. We just have a contract with each market that says we'll give you $2 a head, you find a vet and test all the cows. If we were to reduce the state contribution from $1 to $0 and just pay the $1 in federal funds, the thought or the intent is that that $1 would be passed on to the man or woman selling an adult animal, and the result would be that when fees are to be derived, that would be credited as a type of fee to the cattle industry because in effect they're paying $1 a head to have their cattle tested. So this discussion is not about stopping first point testing. Texas is still a high-risk state. We found brucellosis. USDA does not want Texas to stop. The normal routine is go at least 5 years. We have 2 more years of high risk. If we find any more brucellosis, it may be more than 2 more years. So the only high-risk states left are Texas and the states around Yellowstone. That's Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And in fact, USDA's intent right now is to reduce or stop slaughter testing of cattle, go to statistical sampling, and their intention is, at least what they've told us they're probably going to do, is by the money they save with slaughter testing is continue to pay Texas and Yellowstone states to do first point testing and other surveillance methods that are better. Slaughter surveillance is not the best method. In discussions with the cattle industries, lots of talk about should we stop or not stop, but the bottom line is you're providing quality assurance, you're providing, the buyer of cattle knows they're getting a test negative animal, and other states also feel comfortable that a high-risk state is doing first point testing. And as I told y'all last meeting when we found our infected herd, about 10 state vets all called me to say, tell me again what you're doing in Texas. And I was able to say, we're doing first point testing. And they were like, good, okay, as long as you keep that up, we're not too worried about this. But if y'all were to quit, then they perceive Texas to be a high-risk state. And we are, I'll be quite honest with you. There probably could be more brucellosis out there, let alone talking about the feral swine implications. And we don't know what that all entails. In Mexico, and one of the cows we found was a Mexican. It had 5 brands that were all what we were told were Mexican brands, and the guy's ranch is on the border, and Mexico continues to provide a border security threat for animal health in Texas, and brucellosis is one of the diseases. So we are a high-risk state. So what's on the table today for discussion is one way that this agency can save money and help balance its budget and offset other fee consideration would be to start paying $1 a head to a market owner instead of $2 a head, and basically all we have to do is change that contract. It's not even an action item. I would prefer that y'all give me direction. Truthfully, we could have already done this. This is just a contract, like we have other contracts that can be amended. So this is not a discussion about stopping first point testing. It's reducing the state contribution, which would help with our budget crisis, but it would be offset as a credit towards fees if and when y'all decide to do that for the cattle industry. So they will be given credit for that. I'll be glad to answer any questions. That's what's up for discussion. Do you think it's a good idea to basically give $1 instead of $2 to help, since our budget's in a mess, bottom line?
Will we continue to get the USDA money?
Yes, ma'am. They're continuing. They're basically my understanding is that their intent, unless their budget gets cut, is to continue to give us the $1 million or $1.2 million for first point testing. So what I'll say there is that if we reduce to $1 and all we're paying is the $1 pass-through, there's really no fiscal liability to the agency at all. First point testing will not, we wouldn't save any money by stopping, let me put it that way, because all we would do is give back the $1 million. So basically the Texas cattle industry is receiving $1 million+ to help detect brucellosis and have a negative herd. It's a supplement. And so our folks are still at markets. We have other disease programs we do there. We would still be there if first point testing stopped. And so this basically would remove the liability. We have the direct liability and also like I said, the burden of never knowing how your budget's going to be in the summer until you see whether it rains or not. And it's really a hard thing to manage an agency based upon fluctuations of cattle numbers. And we've been doing it for years, and we kind of know how, but it's hard, and it leaves a level of uncertainty over you at all times. And with our no longer having any reserves to deal with, the level of uncertainty is the difference between do we run out of money or not, which is the agency would get in trouble if that happens. And so we've had numerous discussions with you guys. I think y'all are all aware of what I'm talking about here, but I'm just asking for direction, formal direction. Do you want us to reduce our first point from $2 to 1 point? We are not stopping first point. We're just reducing the amount we pay the markets. And the markets, in theory, will pass that on to the cattle producer selling the animal, and the cattle producer and the industry will receive credit for that as an offset to any future fees that have to be paid.
So if I understand it right, the government will continue to give us the portion they've always given us if we don't match it.
We have enough of a match in our field work. We do have a 40% match, but we spent $3.5 million on brucellosis last year. And so you take this $1 million out, we still spent $2.5 million on brucellosis, and that's enough to match the federal part. So this won't cause any problems for us in matching or any other thing. It's just $1 million the agency's saving, bottom line.
Any other?
What would the cattle industry response or saying? What is being discussed?
Well, I think it's important, if you look at some of the paperwork on the previous, some of the previous discussions that we had on fees, this $1 million that the agency is going to save is when we get to the point where we talk about fees, the cattle industry portion of that fees is going to be credited this $1 million, because that's basically what it is. This is going to cost the producer. But in my opinion, this is something that we need to do, especially in the times that we're at right now. We have not received any federal money. We've got to keep this agency going until we can meet as an industry and figure out how we're going to fund it in the future.
If we cut this $1 million now, and you don't get $1.2 million from the USDA because they didn't print that money to send to you, then what are you going to do, Dee?
Well,
I don't even want to think about it.
I don't know.
We need to talk about it.
I mean, they say we're going to get our money for this fiscal year. It's just hung up in some paperwork. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I think we'll get our money in the next 3 or 4 weeks. They'll start to pay us these cooperatives. Obviously, if that were to, I would say when the federal money cuts off, then the commission should reconsider first point testing completely. Maybe go to some of the options we talked about before, let the producer choose whether to test or not, and they'd have to pay for the whole cost. But right now, USDA's intent, like I said, they're evaluating nationally their surveillance for brucellosis, and they don't like duplicative surveillance streams, and so they're thinking about stopping surveillance at the slaughter plant and giving us the money because they know it's better to do it at a market while the cow's alive. And so I don't know the answer other than I would say you would have to consider stopping immediately or changing this, which would be a rule. You'd have to amend the rules. You basically wouldn't be a market rule change. It would be across the state. It would be a change of ownership change. Right now, you're required to test cattle with change of ownership. It just happens that a lot of them change owners at the market. But when you stop requirement at a market, you basically would need to stop the change of ownership across the state of Texas for all classes of adult test eligible cattle.
One last question. If we go ahead and decide to reduce this payment, when does that action become effective?
My recommendation, do it as soon as possible because we can carry this money over through the federal funds. And I think a reasonable goal would to have these contracts amended by June 12th. So Monday's June 13th and start in the middle of June. That gives us almost 3 weeks to basically just go to a market and have them sign a new contract. And that's my recommendation, is to do it as soon as possible, because this is, if $25,000 a week, if we stop, we have August, July, and half of June, that's $250,000 that the agency's going to be able to carry over into the next fiscal year.
A motion's not even necessary. We just thought it would be good for us to show our support and give this agency some direction.
Mr. Chairman, I support this action. I believe it's in the best interest of not only the Texas Animal Health Commission, but the overall health and stability of all livestock actions within the state. I suggest that we approve this and approve it immediately.
How about a motion?
I do so move we approve the actions regarding first point testing as discussed today.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 6. Any discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dr. Ellis. I guess you're going to give us the trick working group report.
You should have staggered these, I think.
Yeah, I know.
Y'all are going to be sick of talking to me. Well, in
Well,
your...
you'll be staggering before you're through.
Yeah, that's all right. I enjoy this. This is fun in a way, and it's fun when everyone goes home. Am I on the record when I said that? So, thank you, Gene. I was kidding. I was kidding. So if you look on tab, what is this? 8, 7. Basically, what I gave y'all was the summary minutes of the trichomoniasis working group, which, just for background, in case anybody in the audience doesn't know, that the commission believes in transparency and open deliberation, and so we use working groups. And when this disease program was requested for consideration by the cattle industry, the decision was made to have an annual review of the progress of the disease program, so that this doesn't happen to fall in the same category of others where the program was worse than the disease. And obviously at the federal level, TB, brucellosis, we didn't have any choice. We basically did what we were told. But this is a state program, and so the state, you guys, y'all collectively have the authority to make changes. And so we meet in May of each year, and this is going to be this was the second annual meeting. Commissioner Locke led it. Some other commissioners were on it. And all the industry groups are on it, stakeholder groups, veterinarians, AgriLife Extension, folks at A&M, private practitioners, and vet school, anybody that had any stake was invited to come to this. And not to go through it all, if you want to just go to on page 3, I'll just go through the decisions that were made, and I can discuss any of them, and Commissioner Locke may have some comments as well. There were some substantive changes made, and what I told the group starting off is this is the first time, however, that a disease program, good idea, may not be implemented because of money. And this is a program that was one of our exceptional items, and we're spending approximately $500,000 a year out of our coffers right now in TRIC. We asked for consideration that our budget be supplemented, and they said no. And that was bluntly what they said. Shouldn't have done it if you didn't have the money. That's what I was told, point blank. And we said, no, it's a good idea, and the commission wanted to do it, and the industry wanted to do it, and it's working well. So we're going to work through this. But what I cautioned the group was that if there were some really good ideas that were too expensive to do, we just may not be able to do them yet because this is a controlled program. Probably one of the most substantive changes that was made there is the very first one, which is the group felt that they no longer would honor virgin status certification for out-of-state bulls. Because two things can happen. One is the guy doesn't know that his bull's not a virgin, and two, he knows but he lies about it. Neither one are the same end result. And so we took a look at the other states, and Dr. Hensley and Swartz attended a meeting out in West with other Western state vets who've been doing this a long time, and took a look at their rules and regulations. and we adopted a minimum age rather than a virgin status. And basically, any bull over 12 months of age has to have a trick test now to enter the state of Texas, and any bull under 12 months of age is exempt unless they know that he's been with female cattle. And some of the breeds, the Jerseys and Angus, and some of those European breeds can mature earlier than that. And so, no more virgins. Now, we still do accept it for Texas animals. So we're giving Texas animals a different criteria, but for out-of-state entry, they basically have to have a trick test to enter the state. Bottom line. Yes.
How are you aging those?
Well, we're probably not. And the bottom line is, to come in from out of state, you've got to have a health certificate. So the burden's on that veterinarian writing it in another state to tell us how old the bull is. And we hope that we're still going to have inspectors that can monitor special bull sales and regular livestock auction sales that may have some bulls. And just like our inspectors have discretion to determine what's a feral hog or what's a test-eligible hog or what's a test-eligible bull, if they look at that health certificate and it says 11 months, and they look at the bull and his tail's rubbing the ground, our guys are just going to say no. We don't allow that. So you can't really, as you know, the teeth and all that. It's not a real easy way to do it. The truth is, what the thought was, if you wean them at 8 or 9 months, and then if you want to background them for a couple of months or get them ready and ship them, they're probably going to be 12 months old anyway. Very rarely you're going to wean a calf and send it to a special bull sale the next week. Most of them are older than that, and if we're wrong and they're 13 instead of 11, we're still better off than what it was before, which is accepting virgins. So we're not really going to do it other than hopefully our inspectors are going to be there, and if the market owner especially needs help, our guys will make the call. I don't believe, and about 16 months they start losing their baby teeth, the first 2 incisors, and worst case, 13, 14 months old, we may have to make a call on it, but the big ones will catch. So that's the thought there. And I think all the way through, Commissioner Locke would agree that we're trying to be reasonable and not over the top. And so that was the thought. We'll just deal with them, and if they look wrong, we'll talk to the guy and make a call whether to let them in or not. So we had some other requests, some technical things, letting out-of-state bulls go to feed yards on permits, and we're going to let that happen. And we're going to let infected bulls go through a market in Texas to go to slaughter only. And this is going to use our permit system. Again, you need to have an inspector to market. And this is going to use our permit system. Again, you need to have an inspector to market to verify these permits and reissue the permits. Pool samples was the other really big discussion, and we're learning more and more about pool samples, and we believe the evidence is not conclusive, but it's pretty close, that pool samples done at the laboratory, not by the veterinarian collecting it. In other words, not one vet takes 5 samples and puts them in one little pouch, but he takes 5 bull samples, sends them to the lab, and then they use a really sterile pipette and they put them into one pool. We believe that the evidence is close enough that it's just almost as good, and so the decision was made in infected herds to allow one of the 2 tests that are required for release to be pool samples at the laboratory. And this is a money-saving issue to the industry, because we've had herds with 300, 400, 500 bulls, and you're looking at anywhere from $50 to $100 per test. And so if they can reduce their cost by 80%, that's a significant savings. And the evidence that we're starting to see in some other labs in other states is, and even Texas A&M Lab said that it's not that bad. It's pretty good. It's close enough, and we'll continue to watch this, but the decision was made to allow pool samples for one of the 2 tests. So a bull will have to have one individual test, and then the other test could be pooled up to 5 in a pouch. Yes, sir, Commissioner White. Oh, I thought you had a question. All right, on the last page, another significant issue, control herd status, and I would say we're going to try this. And this was numerous requests from large herds that were actually making the claim that we don't want to have happen, which is the program's worse than the disease. And when you have 300 or 400 bulls and you test them once, a lot of those guys turn them out, or a lot of them don't test the bulls until they're ready to turn them out. They wait, and then they do their semen evaluation. And it was putting a burden on them, and they were getting good calf crops. And so what they asked was for consideration that they only have to test once a year and just turn the bulls back out with their cows. Our requirements are you have to have 2 negative tests to release, and right now I just said when you have trick, you have to get rid of it. You have to have 2 tests. What we developed as a pilot is what we call a control herd plan, control herd status. In an agreement for just letting them test their bulls once per year, they promise to not sell any breeding bulls, to only sell slaughter bulls, and to test every year until they're cleaned up. After 3 years, if they're not cleaned up, then they got to go back into the regular control program and test twice a year. The point is, if I have 400 bulls, and that means I have 10,000 cows, I obviously have trick in my females, and even if I test them negative, I'm going to get reinfected when I turn them right back out. And this gives those large ranches the opportunity to work with their private practitioner to develop a herd plan to eradicate trick from their herd that makes sense for their program and can be done in the most efficient manner and still be effective over the long haul within 3 years. And part of the requirement is that they have a herd plan with their veterinarian as to what they're going to do. If they don't, or if it doesn't work after 3 years, then we're going to say, all right, well, you need to get cleaned up. And so this is a 3-year temporary way for them. And truthfully, it's probably going to take that long to clean up a big herd, maybe longer. So we also, number 7 there, we had we did not have a maximum time frame for how long infected bulls had to retest for release. And so we put in there that if you have one test, you need to do the next test within 60 days. It was just a loophole in our rules. You know, we tested them, said it's time to test again. They looked in the rules, said, well, it doesn't say how long. Eventually I'll do it. And so it was causing us some legal problems, so we wrote that in. Second test within 60 days. We put in a little rule there that said best 2 out of 3. If we have a positive, we give folks the right to retest it. If it comes back negative, then we clarified that we weren't going to just go with that. We wanted a third test, and whatever the third test says, that's what we'll decide. So, and it has to be done at the A&M lab, at the Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Lab. So, kind of common sense, but it wasn't in there, and it's, again, we're just clarifying language. And also some language clarification on rendering bulls incapable of breeding. And again, as y'all know, some of these bucking bulls are really expensive, and the veterinarians on the group, some of them are good surgeons, and with my permission or a list of certified folks eligible to do that, we're going to consider allowing some bulls to be surgically altered to make them incapable of breeding, but they'll still buck, if that makes sense. So it's kind of not to get too anatomical, but and we're going to see how it works.
Teaser bucking bulls.
Sidewinders.
Yeah, teaser bucking bulls, and that'll really make them mad, I would think. All right, so and again, some language clarification on our certified free herd status for trick, and we just need to we had some language we need to clear up to make sure it says while they're applying to be certified free or accredited free, whatever the term is, for 3 years, any bull leaving has to have a test. And there was an out that said, well, they could go to slaughter. Well, that defeats the purpose, because you could have infected bulls, you're just selling them to slaughter, and we wouldn't know it. So this just says you gotta, if you're going to sell bulls, they have to be tested until you get your status. And once you're free, then we'll assume they're free, and they won't have to do that anymore. Then there were some policies. Those are all rule changes, and that's all on you. All those things I just went over are rule changes that you guys will consider. There were some just general policy changes to wrap up real quick that just said one of the things we're going to do is we do allow, and not all states do this, but we will allow an untested bull at a market to be purchased by someone who decides they want to make it a breeding bull, and so they get it tested. And we already had in the rule that the bull was to be tested as a designated facility, and our intent there is to more strictly enforce our policy. And for those markets that have a market vet and they've got a shoot that have a market vet and they've got a shoot, we're gonna talk to them about making the bull be tested before it leaves the market. And why is that important? Because then we know who tested it, we know it got tested, our inspector will be there, they could actually help them, it's okay, they can run the chute or whatever. But a lot of times these bulls disappear, and what they do is they go try and buck them for a couple of weeks, and if they don't really ride well, they just bring them back, and it's causing us a lot of trouble. And so for markets that don't have a veterinarian or don't have good facilities, then we'll negotiate with that market owner some other place that he agrees, a local vet clinic or somewhere. But we're going to try and lock this down where these bulls get tested before they leave the facility. There are some markets that don't do this, and there's some markets that already are doing this where their vet at the end of the day he just gets all the bulls up and he does the test. And it takes about 10 or 15 minutes a bull to do this. It's not as easy as just taking a blood sample. So that's not a rule change, that's just policy. We're going to work with each market owner to try and find a location that's consistent where that bull is going to be tested. Some market owners don't allow bulls to be purchased like that. They just don't want to deal with it. They're selling slaughter bulls. We clarified the intent of our traceability and that we are definitely, if a guy sells a bull that's found to be positive later, he sells a bull for slaughter only, someone buys it and wants to test it and it is positive, we are going to tell him about it. We're not going to require him to test his bulls. That was a lot of discussion about. That's kind of a transition from controlled eradication and kind of a voluntary program to starting to be a little more punitive. So the group decided to wait at least one more year before they reconsidered that. Common sense would tell you he's got trick and maybe he should test his other bulls, but the group felt like things were working well enough, and so most people, if they're told they have trick, will take a look at their own bulls and voluntarily do it. So that's, but we weren't even telling them right now. This is just one of those things we identified there. Number 3, there's only 4 for the group. There's only one more. We're gonna wait and see what our budget is before we decide whether to continue telling neighbors. We're spending a lot of time on epidemiological investigations, field staff. If I have to lay off field staff, then I don't have the people to do the mapping and the epi work, and so we just decided that depending on the budget, whether we're going to continue to tell neighbors that their neighbor has an infected bull. And
would we be able to send something along those lines out through our normal news release system?
Well, we normally don't talk about specific names of people that have disease issues.
Well, we might be able to notify by county or region.
Well, what would you mean? How would you tell someone in Van Zandt? You'd say Van Zandt County has 5 infected.
We found 5 trick-infected bulls in Van Zandt County that entered the public market. I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
Not a good idea.
Okay.
Had anthrax in Crockett County, and the guy's owner lived in Slacker County, and so it came out in the paper that the guy from Slacker County had anthrax, and everybody there was kind of disturbed.
I would think so.
Yeah, you don't always know where they came from.
Okay.
So it would be kind of hard to not make that mistake. And the last one is we did agree to start to seek and consider bona fide research facilities that might want to look at some treatment options for infected bulls. And with my approval, we'll let bulls go like I sent the bull to Auburn to be treated. We hope and believe that there might be a treatment somewhere down the line, but I specifically put in there, we're not going to let veterinarians just kind of treat around on them, see what they can do. So we put that in there on purpose so that vets don't call and say, I've got this secret salve I'm going to try. We're just not going there, but if someone like Texas A&M wanted to do some research, we believed it was beneficial to let them do the research. So I don't know, Commissioner Locke, you may want to say some things. I thought it was a good meeting and is working well. But
we had a great meeting, and I want to thank our industry leaders who participated. You can't believe the level of participation that we had and the forethought that went into this meeting. Every time we get this task force together, everybody just digs in and works and supports it. And I, on behalf of the commission, I want to thank you all for doing that. It's great support and good. We get good feedback. And every time we meet, we're able to fine-tune things just a little bit better.
so basically I've been over some of the background for some of the rules you're going to consider in just a little bit. That's basically what I just did.
Doctor, just a question, these untested bulls from out of state going to a certified feed yard, so in-state bulls can go straight there without being tested?
We do have a process. If you take a bull to a market, a buyer that has a facility that we've approved can buy that bull before it goes. It's still considered in slaughter channels. Up until now, we were telling out-of-state bulls, you got to meet our entry requirements. The truth is it was hard to enforce because an out-of-state bull from a premise can enter a Texas market and kind of be sold just like a Texas animal, and it was causing some problems for our market inspectors deciding, well, that bull can go, but that bull can't, and then, people discuss whether the bull really came from here or there. So this just basically gave out-of-state bulls the same options as Texas bulls, which included going to a feeding facility prior to slaughter. And we maintain a list, and we've got to contract those guys, and they have to keep records, and they have good fences, and there's a few of those that are in trader channels, and they're not a feeder facility. They're just someone that's kind of like a temporary. We're not going to let these bulls go there. They need to go to a feed yard, And so there may be a few names on our list that can buy a bull without a test, and we're going to tell them you can't go there because they're just trading on them. We don't want out-of-state bulls traded, but if a feeding facility wants to buy these out-of-state bulls, we're going to let them do that now. And again, that's part of the market inspector infrastructure, and they have discretion and they have a good communication and working relationship with their markets, and we believe we can do this without causing a risk to the state of Texas.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Item number 8, Dr. Schwartz. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Morning.
I would just say before I dig into this this report, my summary is under tab 8, and just behind that you'll see some statistics for those of you who like numbers. We changed the look of that up a little bit to try to make it more current this time. So just not that you have to. I'm not going to go over those today or right now at this meeting unless you have questions about them. But I just wanted to make you aware that we've updated that a bit. And okay, so cattle disease issues. Initially, tuberculosis, as Dr. Ellis said, we still have free status. Since September 1, since last fall, we've had 5 lesioned animals at slaughter. 2 of those one of them had a Mexico ear tag. The other was in a consignment from Mexico, so we traced those back to Mexican origin. The 3 remaining cases are under investigation right now. None of those 3 had a tag that would track us, lead us back to Mexico. But we've got to do the investigative work and see what the cattle, their cohorts basically, see what they were fed, do the tracing back. So still working on those. Dr. Ellis gave you a fair amount of information on the brucellosis herd we had in Starr County that was disclosed in January, early this year. That herd was depopulated with federal money. All the cattle, we looked at records as far back as the market had records and the individuals' records and traced those animals, and they either went to slaughter or we purchased them and sent them to slaughter so that we removed that disease source there. We tested one operation that was a potential trace-in or a source herd, that had sold cattle this operation, and those cattle were negative. So, and then we also tested adjacent herds out for 1 mile around each of the 2 pastures where this individual had kept these cattle. And we found negative tests on all of those 42 herds that were tested. So we were a little bit puzzled about where the source of infection might have been in this herd. We knew that if you go back 10 years or so in Starr County, there were some cattle herds affected, but they weren't right in this immediate area. So Dr. Ellis urged us to work with Wildlife Services and take a look at feral swine in the area. And part of that concern was Dr. Gary Adams over at Texas A&M has done some research on it's called a UBDA, Universal Biodetection Array, and it's using basically the PCR to look for a lot of different DNA in a sample. And we hope that his work will lead us to a better diagnostic capability on these cattle that have high titers for brucellosis, to differentiate swine and cattle brucellosis in them. And so we were looking for some tissues and blood samples on swine with that in mind. But and Wildlife Services went out and were able to capture, trap 16 feral hogs in this area, and they collected samples, sent them to our lab, and all 16 of them were negative on the blood test. But we cultured the tissues as well, and on one of those sets of tissues, we're culturing Brucella abortus. We're culturing cattle brucellosis out of a swine, and that's the first time we've done that in Texas. And we had that concern back in Jack County several years ago when I was still working in that area, because the cow herd had Brucella suis and Brucella abortus both in it. But we tested feral swine then and did not find the cattle kind in the swine then, but this time we did. And so, what's the significance of that? To me, it's not good for our cattle brucellosis eradication efforts, because that means we could have pockets of cattle brucellosis in feral swine scattered around the state, because certainly we had feral swine while we still had a number of cattle brucellosis affected herds. So we'll just have to see how that plays out, but that was little bit of intuition on Dr. Ellis's part to steer us in that direction, and I was surprised and excited, but I'm also a little bit scared about what this means for our eradication program. I did find one other reference in the literature. I heard in swine herd in South Carolina and was reported in 2008 as having Brucella abortus in the feral swine. They cultured it at 29 out of 80 feral swine captured, and there hadn't been cattle on that ground since the 70s. So it had infection had maintained itself in those feral swine that long. So interesting times from that regard. Trichomoniasis, Dr. Ellis has we've already gone over that. Cattle fever ticks, Dr. Ellis mentioned this as well. The vaccine study by ARS shows some promise. Ivermectin molasses tub study will begin soon, and that I think the primary purpose of that, Dr. Ellis, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the study is to prove that it's safe to use in cattle, but it's also a side benefit. We want to see if the benefits of tick eradication are there as well, like it indicates from initial work at ARS. Moving to swine issues, Dr. Ellis said it, but I want to say it again. We have free status now, finally, after all these years of trying. The rule is published in the Federal Register. It'll be out for comment, but I couldn't anticipate or don't anticipate any pushback on that. From the pseudorabies standpoint, we've done some work at our state federal lab here in Austin to get it approved as a national, basically one of the national reference labs for pseudorabies testing, and we're doing that so we can keep good quality surveillance on our swine population, because we were concerned that if all the testing is done at another state and they're only doing 5% of the swine, we're never going to keep enough numbers to maintain our brucellosis and pseudorabies status. And so we have a few minor corrections to make in our lab, but we've had an inspection, had a review of our lab, and we think we're going to pass that. We should have it in a month or so. On the sheep and goat front, as we reported at previous meetings, that we had a scrapey consistent state review. A team came in and looked at our program, and overall we got good marks for the program. They had some concerns about identification of animals at markets, and so we've taken corrective measures there. We've had some signs put up at producers' livestock and talked to the folks there about making sure that 90% plus of those sheep coming through that market are identified. So Dr. Terry Hensley has been very instrumental in getting that carried out, going out and visiting with the market, working with our folks down there. And we haven't had scrapie in a number of years now, so that's a good sign. I think we did have, Dr. Edmiston, I think we did have anthrax in a sheep last fall down, and so that kind of made the news for a little while in the Big Bend area. But moving on to our cervids and exotics. Tomorrow, we've talked before about a shared deer breeder database. That's something that the legislature said we had to do with Parks and Wildlife, and it was the whole purpose of that was to try to eliminate some of the record-keeping requirements of these deer breeders. And so we've been working with Parks and Wildlife for over the last year and a half or so on this issue, and they've made some changes to their existing database so we can use it for our purposes now. But they're also developing an entire new database. And so we have a meeting scheduled here tomorrow with them, and we're going to go through a demonstration of what the current system does and what they think they want the new system to do, and we'll finish out with our specifics on what we would like it to do for our purposes as well. So it's a kind of a two-way street tomorrow, a little give and take on that shared database. I just want to mention that the deer and exotic hoofstocks are a huge factor in cattle fever tick eradication. We've well established now that the ticks can be maintained on deer and exotic hoofstock. And so in these areas where Dr. Ellis has talked to you about where we're releasing these blanket quarantines, we have to be careful that, if the places have been vacated of cattle and there's deer out there, we have to be sure that there aren't ticks being maintained on those deer. And so we're using some population estimates that Parks and Wildlife is helping us get to establish, how many deer feeders need to be out there, where they need to be placed, and then how many deer do we need to check to make sure there aren't fever ticks there before we release a quarantine area. So we're rolling all of that into our review process. Now, the rest of my discussion will be on equine issues, and seems like we have a horse disease about every year or two these days. And so it was 3 years ago it was CEM, and then 2 years ago it was pyroplasmosis, and now we're talking about equine herpes. And so, just briefly on the equine pyroplasmosis situation. I'm a little bit encouraged that the new cases that we're finding, it seems to be flattening out. We're not finding as many per month as we were, but we have a significant number of them outside of that South Texas ranch. In fact, we've got 10 import horses and 56 quarter horse race horses that have been found positive. Some of those horses have been euthanized. We actually, 4 of them were permitted to move back to Mexico. They went under permit and seal, so that requires the USDA, us agreeing to let them go, USDA making all that work legally, and then Mexico being willing to receive it. So the national governments have to coordinate together to make this happen, and so, but we were glad to see 4 of them leave our state, at least. What we're finding on the experimental treatment, that's the program that's primarily led by Agriculture Research Service, Don Knowles in Pullman, Washington, we're finding that some of those horses are going negative after several months after treatment, 6 or 7 months after treatment. And I'd say out of 72 that were treated and tested, there have been 14 of them that have gone completely negative on all the tests. So that gives us some encouragement that treatment is effective, and the National Working Group met and is making the recommendation up the chain to USDA that the nation recognize those horses as free. So we haven't actually, the working group is still preparing that document. It hasn't actually gone up to John Clifford, but that request will be made. So we hope to be able to release some of these horses. And Agriculture Research Service is also working on a different diagnostic assay, one that they call it a clearing test. Basically, it would be used on these treated horses and on import horses, and it's basically still sensitive. It picks up the disease, but it's based on an antigen that the antibodies go away over time. It's not as persistent. So what you would pick up, what supposedly is only the truly infected horses, not the cured horses. And ARS says they're really close to having that assay out, and obviously we'd want them to validate it before we started using it. So now let me go to the last disease.
Dr.
I'll talk.
Schwartz, let me
Yes,
say
sure.
one thing. I got an email the other day, and of course the racetracks they have required testing of pyro for all the horses entering them. The AQHA a week or so ago, when I got this email, it might have been 2 weeks ago anyway, has said that has required now for all national AQHA shows in Amarillo, Fort Worth, and Houston, all horses entering will have to have a pyro test on AQHA shows. And the reason for that is so many barrel horses, barrel horses, speed event horses that are sometimes come from racetracks, from racing stock and converted over. So they're now requiring on those 3 cities, the national AQHA sanctioned shows are requiring it.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner, for adding that information. And you'll be considering a rule later on today, or adoption of a rule that will require, our rule that would require testing to go before horses go to racetracks. And so that'll stack on top of what you're already seeing there. So, and that's something that the Racing Commission supports. We've talked with them, and they don't have an issue at all. In fact, most of those tracks put on their own testing requirements.
Well, this is showing where the industry, as far as AQHA, is being serious about this as well. Anyway,
that's right. We heard strongly from AQHA and American Horse Association that they want disease freedom. Basically, they want to get back to that free status as a nation. So my last topic is equine herpes virus, or EHV1. This is a viral infection of horses that can cause respiratory illness, especially in weanling foals. It can actually cause neonatal death, cause respiratory illness, especially in weanling foals. It can actually cause neonatal death, a pneumonia in newborn foals. It can cause abortions in mares, and it sometimes causes a neurological condition called equine herpes myeloencephalopathy. That's just a big term for saying it affects the brain and spinal cord. It makes them wobbly and weak and can make them go down, and either where they would die or have to be euthanized for humane reasons. So at the end of April, early May, April 29th through May 8th, there was a Western States Cutting Horse Championship held in Ogden, Utah. And after about 3 days after that event was over, when the horses started coming back home, Colorado was the first state to report a horse with the neurological signs, and so that raised awareness. And then over the next few days, a number of other horses were diagnosed as positive. And so late Friday night, early Saturday morning, Dr. Ellis was given notice of some Texas horses having participated in that event. In fact, there were 27 horses on the official roster, and so we had a quick call from various locations, Dr. Ellis, and set things in motion, and got Dr. Hensley involved as a field manager, and we had all our field people call all of these horse owners over the weekend and tell them what was going on, what to look for, to stop moving those horses and be on the lookout. And then we actually eventually had put all those horses under a hold order as well. So what we're doing is stopping the movement of those horses and monitoring them, and we're also we've gotten a ton of calls from horse owners, event organizers, veterinarians, and other states concerned over this situation. There was a national report compiled last Friday and put out, and it indicated that there were 7 horses nationwide that had died. 33 more cases were confirmed. That means the horse is sick and it tests positive at the lab. So we've only had one confirmed case in Texas, and that was actually a New Mexico horse that had been at Ogden, Utah, and came to Texas for veterinary treatment. It's recovered enough so that it was sent back home. The veterinarian was astute enough to leave that horse in the trailer and put it at the back of the clinic grounds, and so it didn't expose other horses. So, but we've continued to get some reports of horses showing signs. As you can imagine, there's a lot of anxiety amongst the horse owning public, and so they're having their horses tested and they're doing a lot of vaccination. We've actually got 11 horses that are not showing any signs, but they're testing positive for equine herpes virus. And I believe that at least 8 of those are due to a vaccine. They were vaccinated with a product one day and then blood drawn the next day, and they're using a real-time PCR. It's a killed vaccine, but they're using a real-time PCR, and they're detecting that DNA in the blood of those horses. It's incredible that they can do that, but I think that's what's happening. So
there is a vaccine for it.
There's a vaccine against equine herpes virus. There's none labeled for this neurological kind. So there's what they're calling a neuropathogenic strain. It's that herpes virus that has a single point, at least a single point mutation on it. And when it does that mutation, that amino acid base pair switches, then it becomes more likely to cause neurologic disease and more likely to shed out the nasal passages. And so, but none of the vaccines are labeled for that, so they don't know if it works or not. But I do know that some of the products have both strains in there, the regular variety that causes the pneumonia and the abortion and all that, but also either one of them can cause neurologic signs, but it's usually this mutated version. They're putting both in the vaccines, at least in some of them, but we don't know how efficacious it is. There's definitely some solidly vaccinated horses that have broken with the disease, so it's definitely not completely protective. So, yes, sir.
Being a herpes virus, Andy, how long do you know how long those infected horses could continue to shed herpes virus?
Yeah, that's they're potential bombs the rest of their lives. I mean, they carry the virus, as you know, the rest of their lives, but the literature says, can be 3 weeks or more. And so we tried to base the USDA issued some guidelines on how to manage these cases, and they're saying incubation period is 2 to 10 days, and so we set our mark at 14 days post-exposure. The problem is some horses can get infected and shed the virus and never show signs themselves, so we're concerned about that next layer. And there are some secondary infected horses in some states but most of the time it's been where an Ogden exposed horse came home, got sick, and then exposed other horses at the farm. So, but 3 weeks. So our isolation after, if we have a case in Texas, we'll hold those exposed horses 28 days. This is our plan, and that's the national model. Or 21 days with a negative test. They do a nasal swab at 21 days, and if they're negative and everybody's clinically normal, we'd release them. Questions? If not, there's the mortality rate. If they start showing neurological signs, about 40% of those won't recover. They'll have to be put down. So if they show, almost half of them don't make it if they show neural signs. But again, there's many horses exposed that won't ever show signs. Thank you. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dice will now give us an audit subcommittee report. They met this morning bright and early at 8 o'clock.
We did call our meeting to order right at 8 o'clock. All members were present. We first approved the minutes of the February 22nd meeting, and then we had 2 things to consider, and each had 2 subtitles to consider. The first one was a follow-up on the audit of the Palestine laboratory. There seemed to be a question about the format that was being used, difficult for some to read and understand, but now they have that worked out as to they have a consistent way of recording their database. And there's also a smoking sign in the break room, where they could, but there hasn't been any smoking going on in years, so they kind of decided it may be just an antique. No, they did take that down, which was needed to be done. Then there was an audit of the consumable supplies, and these consumable supplies have kind of collected up and need to be disposed of in the way that the state requires. And I understand that we have hired Kathy, and I didn't catch her last name, but Kathy, to get this job done, and she's already working on it. And so items that can be resold are being sent to the proper place to be resold, and if they are, we get 25% of that sale price back into the commission. There's also a problem with one of the units that we've rented to store these supplies in leaking water. So they've are disposing of enough of this equipment that we hope we can no longer need this particular unit. So maybe that'll solve that problem. There was really no public comment, and the meeting was adjourned.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
I move we approve the audit subcommittee report as presented today. Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the audit subcommittee report. Is there any discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Dr. Cochran, we are ready for items 10 and 11, Administrative Budget Status Report and consideration of possible action on agency contracts and purchases. Good morning, Dr. Cochran.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. You've heard a lot about the budget. Probably are tired of that already, as we are as well. Nonetheless, we're concerned. And I'll just give you a quick update more on maybe this year and hit the high points. You've got a few pages in your book. I'm just going to give you a summary, a few points here. So if we're always trying to parse out our expenditure of state and federal money, even though they're spent at the same time. And at our current spending puts us, our RGR funds will be expended, it looks like, by end of June to mid-July on our current trajectory. And the rest of the remaining, the rest of the fiscal year will rely on federal funds to the tune of about $1.2 million. These are federal funds that we don't have yet. We haven't seen them. We have been working with our USDA partners on the cooperative agreements, the work plans, the revisions, and so we're certainly hoping to see that. As you know, $1.2 million it's not insignificant, and that gets us to the end of August. As Dr. Ellis pointed out, we then carry over the remainder of those awards into the next state fiscal year, and we then use those as well. We will use all of that until the next April, when the next cooperative year would start. This year, with the values we've seen on the cooperatives, we're anticipating a 17 to 20% decrease as compared to last April in the awards. Again, we haven't seen the actual figures yet because we haven't seen any of the awards, but that's what we hear. And next year in April, it looks like we may see a 30 to 35% decrease again on top of that. So the trend continues. It looks like a downward one on federal funds. We have allocated $973,000 out of this fiscal year in general revenue to return to the state coffers as part of our 12.5% biennial budget cut. So that money has been set aside, and we've planned as best possible. The financial services staff has been quite busy tracking encumbrances and watching how we're spending and doing a better job, I think, than we've done in years at trying to predict exactly where we're going to be because it's so critical at this point. And right now, the first point payment basically last week was $68,000. So we've seen an uptick. I mean, we operate on averages over years, but we've seen some serious dollars being paid out in first point. That's just an FYI, latest and greatest figure there. I can take any questions. I just want to mention also, because of emergency management, Dave Tompkins did retire. He certainly leaves some big shoes to fill, and I am encouraged that the people we have in our emergency management department who worked alongside with Dave and trained with him will do a good job in filling those shoes. But I just wanted to mention that as well, and I will say that after I finish speaking, as part of because emergency management is in under my management, I'll have Amanda Barnes just give a brief update on what we've done with the wildfires and the other emergencies that have been ongoing this spring to summer. But with that, do y'all have questions anymore for me on this year's budget, or moving forward, any of the figures you saw talked about earlier?
I just want to thank Dr. Cochran. He's done yeoman's duty these last few months, and give credit to him and his staff for probably, truthfully, the first time in many, many years. I think we actually understand our budget. I'm not sure we did before, I'll just be quite honest with you. It's so complex. There's so many factors, and I want to give them credit for basically, I kind of pushed them to tell me exactly how much money we got, and I think we've got a handle on it. I want to give Matt credit for that, and his folks, Debbie, and the folks in the financial services, because it's taken a long time. Everybody in the agency department and myself are new to the session as far as, and so when we've been scrutinizing our budget, it's been a huge learning curve, and I want to give Matt credit and his people for doing a good job getting a handle on it.
Matt has been throwing a lot of curveballs. And a lot of scenarios, and it seems like when he finishes one task and one question, answers one question, we throw another one at him. And I'd like to reiterate Dr. Ellis's comments. Any other questions? Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the administrative budget status report as discussed today.
Second motion. Been moved and seconded that we approve the administrative budget status report. Is there any discussion? None. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
You were going to have somebody speak?
I will, and
somebody
I'll have her come up
after the next. Okay.
After the next session.
Great.
I'll just say real quick as to the roller coaster from the legislature on the bills. It looks like 1992 the original Hardcastle bill on fee authority went ahead and moved yesterday or last night. So that is a bill. The only change and amendment to our fee authority is that it would be sunsetted. There's no cap on that bill. 1811 is still being stewed down there, and there are some cap amendments put forth on that bill. So it's just kind of up and down roller coaster we've been riding that Dr. Ellis talked about. And so we can move to the next session. I don't think there's any. Basically, y'all, I think you've had a chance to look at this. So, do you have questions about items I can address?
I had asked Dr. Cochran on these types of things. We've gotten this information already. If there's, he doesn't need to go over them one by one. If any of the commissioners have a question, he'd be glad to explain it or answer it. If none, if there are no questions, I'd appreciate a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the contracts and purchases request for the period from February 1st, 2011 through April 30th, 2011.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve agency contracts and purchases. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, well, thank y'all.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Commissioner Wheelis. Amanda?
Sure.
Yes. Well, with the changes in the emergency management departments, some very recent, especially with Dave's retirement, Amanda is now the agency preparedness coordinator. So she's got a big job, whether it's hurricanes, working on some disease issues for certain, and of late, a number of things. The fire response, we're consistently challenged with the outreach to the whole state and the awareness, whether it's veterinarians, local private practitioners. We're going to be making gestures and working more and more with those folks. And I think what she'll tell you about the fire response is we have had some success in what we've learned from other disasters like Ike in partnership with TSCRA, allowing us to be aware of needs out there and to try to help address them. So we did work in unison with partners, especially TSCRA, and in a few counties we were tied in with AgriLife pretty closely, county agents. And so I'll let her speak more, but congratulations to her on her advancement here in our department.
Good morning. As Dr. Cochran mentioned, my name is Amanda Barnes, and I'm the Agency Preparedness and Operations Coordinator for Emergency Management. He asked me to summarize some of the activities we've had over the past, I would say, 45 days, and it's been a busy 45 days for emergency management. Starting in April, we responded to the wildfires that were burning across Texas. Personnel in each of the affected regions, which were 1, 3, and 6, communicated with local officials to ensure that animal-related needs would be addressed in a timely manner. Inspectors and field veterinarians also consulted with producers on carcass disposal issues and worked with the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association and the Texas AgriLife Extension personnel to conduct damage assessments. Current losses reported stand at 458 head of cattle, and these are things that were reported to us. 19 head of sheep, 99 calves, 18 horses, 190 head of goats. 3,389 miles of fence were reported to have been lost. And while April fires have been contained, if the current dry weather conditions continue, and being a farm kid, I think they're going to continue, the numbers are going to rise. Those numbers are going to go up. During the agency's Emergency Management Steering Committee meeting this past April, members reviewed the agency's Foreign and Emerging Animal Disease Response Plan, or the FEAD plan, and compared it to the USDA's Red Book Guidance on Foot and Mouth Disease Response in an effort to align the FEAD plan with the latest USDA guidelines. Other participation in national industry FEAD planning groups includes our involvement in the Multi-State Partnership Working Group on Permitted Movement, as well as the Secure Milk Supply and the Secure Egg Supply planning efforts. At the National Hurricane Conference April 18th, THC personnel were asked to give a presentation about the state's response to animal issues during Hurricane Ike and the progress in planning that both the local jurisdictions and the state have been made since 2008. That was a very valuable opportunity to spread the word about what we've done and the efforts that we've made and to get to hear back from personnel in other states. At the State Emergency Management Conference held in San Antonio April 26th through 29th, THC personnel conducted a panel discussion on the development of animal issue committees and a workshop detailing the role of the federal, state, and local jurisdictions in response to a foreign animal disease outbreak. Both workshops were presented to packed audiences. We were standing room only in those. April 30th through May 2nd, THC personnel conducted an emergency management exercise referred to as Operation Saddle Up in coordination with the Texas A&M College of Veterinary Medicine Veterinary Emergency Team, which is VET for short. Operation Saddle Up tested the response coordination capabilities of both entities in addressing animal issues during a disaster. The exercise was successful in that we identified several issues that we can be easily addressed in order to improve our response partnership. We started working on that as soon as yesterday with some more coordination and discussions on ways to resolve those things. Upcoming events is June 1st, we'll hold an animal response team meeting with industry and state agency partners to conduct an after action over the recent wildfire response and to revisit our partnership and plans and our procedures for the upcoming hurricane season. And this hurricane season is forecast to be a busy one with 16 named storms and 9 hurricanes predicted to affect the Gulf Coast. Does anyone have any questions for me? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
The figures that you gave on the losses from the fires are very interesting. Would you share a copy of that with me?
Yes, sir.
That's very interesting.
I can sure do that. Again, those were what was reported. I'm sure there are producers who had losses and may have chose not to report them to personnel, or maybe they haven't found them all yet. So thank you, and I'll be happy to get this to you.
I want to mention, we've got, I guess, 3 emergency management staff right now, but all the rest of this work was done by our vets and our inspectors that do all the other things. Our emergency response is our normal people who are trained to do that, and we work really hard to get to that level. I'll just say up front, we're working on communications with other state vets, and if there's a major hurricane that hits another Gulf Coast state, we will send a team along with the A&M vet school team if requested to do that. It'll be reimbursed by the federal government at some point. We feel that's critical. We train by helping others. We actually talk about some of these tornado things at some point. We feel that's critical. We train by helping others. We actually talk about some of these tornado things. They decided they didn't need us. But we have a team, and they're our regular folks except for Amanda and a couple other folks, and I'm real proud of them, and this is important. The expectations of the other state agencies and the industries are that we help, and we're doing a good job. I want to thank Amanda and Dr. Cochran and their staff.
Can I say about our personnel that in Region 6, Tim Leary was within a few acres of being affected himself. The Strawn Possum Kingdom fires came within a few miles of my folks' place, but our personnel still went out and did their jobs. They still accomplished amazing things, and I think they were a wonderful face for our agency and how we serve the public, and I'm very proud of them.
Doctor, I'd like to commend her work and your response to the Rock House fire. The people out there greatly appreciate the response from this commission and the state. Amanda kept me abreast of what was going on through an email, and I got reports for a month after of every fire in the state. And thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it.
Just because maybe it's not making news, that it's not being on public news doesn't mean that we're not still working and trying to address those. So thank you for your patience.
I got all kinds of reports.
One other thing you were talking about on Facebook as far as the EHV1 is when the Rock House fire started on, what was it, Saturday night? Was it Friday night or Saturday?
I don't remember what
anyway,
night it was.
The only way they were able to get news out to us, to anybody, was through Facebook, because the microwave tower, or the cell phone tower, and the power lines and telephone lines went down. So the only space was through satellite. The only contact was through satellite on Facebook.
If you go on Facebook right now, you don't have to be a member. Just click on the F icon on our website. You can see pictures our employees took of the fires, pictures of the vet school exercise, and pictures of all the things we do on our wall, so to speak. And I would encourage y'all, even if you're not a member, just click on that little F on our webpage and you can see what we do as an agency on a daily basis. And it's up at the top, and it's a slideshow. And I would encourage y'all to take a look at some of those activities.
Though that a fire just affected a few, it was great training for this agency and Amanda for the big one that is coming. There will be something someday that.
And Tim Leary, she mentioned, is our inspector out there in far west Texas, and he was a victim, but he was still a responder. And that's part of the challenge with any response we do. Sometimes the people we think would be the responders are victims, and so we have to have a backflow of people. We have to have extra people who can come from the Panhandle or East Texas or South Texas, and you got to have a workforce to do that.
Thank you very much. Excellent work. Not to reiterate what I discussed earlier about certain agenda items that were marked as action items, as chairman, I've decided to bypass under section 12 A, B, C, D, and move to E. And the reason for that is, again, we don't have a budget passed. We still have a lot of legislation to look at as far as our fee authority. And again, we'll probably have a special meeting early summer or end of summer. So, Gene, I would ask that you go straight to item number E, Chapter 38, trichomoniasis.
All right, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, what I bring to you today are two chapter proposals in response to the trichomoniasis work group that Dr. Ellis had talked about and that Commissioner Locke had chaired. As Dr. Ellis had told you through the report, there were a number of recommendations that were made by the group that needed to be made in the rules. As such, the first group of changes we're going to look at is in Chapter 33, which is the standard in-state control programs, and then we'll go to Chapter 51, which are inter-requirements. Just walking through very quickly the ones on Chapter 38, as Dr. Ellis noted earlier too. The first one is just to modify the definition of exempt cattle from physically rendered sterile to the fact that they become incapable of intromission at a facility recognized by the Commission, which, as I understand, is appropriate veterinary standard and technology. The second one, going to 38.3, this is the standards and requirements for infected bulls and herds. We have a couple changes here just to clean up some requirements. First was to note the fact that if somebody wanted to have an animal retested to see if it was negative, we wanted to create and establish a process. We have something like this in our EIA program, so we took this in that allows for 2 tests and ensuring that certain standards are met for quality control purposes, but allows the producer, therefore, to determine whether or not his animal actually is positive or has been cleaned up and therefore can go on. Second change is in 38.3C, which we're just trying to establish a time frame. A number of folks would have positive bulls in their herd disclosed, and so they would need to present their negatives for testing, and frankly, that was not an easy task if they had put them back out in pastures or whatever. So, it puts a time frame on so we can hold them accountable to a standard within the rule. We also then set up D, which allows for an alternative process for breeding purposes, provided that they will create a herd control plan with their veterinarian and establish some standards in that would allow for them to, and they test these annually, that would allow them to manage it in that way versus representing them for testing twice within 60 days as provided for in C. So those changes to 38.3. Next one was, as Dr. Ellis noted too, is 38.6 on the official trick test for the PCR tests and stuff would allow for the laboratory, if requested, to be able to pool the individually submitted samples. This can be a cost savings for large facilities. The veterinarians felt like there was still good quality control overall and how it was handled, provided it was done for this type of test and done by the laboratory. Therefore, they will allow that for a producer to be able to request that and handle it that way, reducing their costs, and is still receiving an official test. The next one, as noted, was on 38.8, was the last one. This was just to close an unclear loophole that had been in the herd certification. That is that any bulls there was somebody trying to get a herd certification, that they tested them even if going to slaughter, so they had a status. Because if not, then they could have positive animals that they didn't know were in the herd that had created and maintained a disease. And so, with that, those were the changes. I'll also note, as noted in the preamble and stuff, this was in 38.7, it does require, we have an annual review program, and that's what this work group accomplished, was an annual review of the need and importance of the program to producer, as well as the changes necessary to make it more effective, which is what I bring to you today in Chapter 38, the changes contained in 12E. If y'all have any questions, let me know.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 38, trichomoniasis, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second motion.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item 12E, Chapter 38, trichomoniasis. How do you pronounce that?
Trichomoniasis. Don't ask a lawyer. I could have messed it up. And I take full responsibility for that. Is there any
discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
I have a hard time with four-letter words. That one kills me.
I'm going to say trick.
Okay, I think I agree. That's why I use it sometimes in my preamble, too. Okay. The next one I bring to you is the next rule chapter. This is Chapter 51. It's our entry requirements. As Dr. Ellis noted, probably the biggest recommendation to come out of the group was to no longer allow for certificate of virgin status to be used for entry purposes. Clearly, there were a number of reasons that made this a much higher risk in allowing that. Some states had already gone and made a change. As such, the recommendation was to modify and drop it down to you could come, breeding bulls could come in at under 12 months of age and under without a test, or if anything 12 or older, it had to have a test. Makes it cleaner, easier to enforce, as well as I think an easier standard to manage as such. Second part was to also remove the ability to use the culture test, which I would defer to some of the veterinarians, but as I understand, as pointed out in the discussion groups and stuff.
Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Sorry to keep interrupting, Gene, but when we go to item 13, these are item 13.
But as I understand, as pointed out in the discussion groups and stuff, you can have a lot greater latitude false positives, things with the culture test. A PCR is a much higher quality, much more accurate test. As such, we are ensuring that only the PCR test will be accepted. Also, as I understand, the PCR test can only be run by the official labs that run it, so you, once again, have a greater quality control. Then whether we were doing some cleanups and stuff in terms of the use of the certificate of veterinary inspection and making sure that the information was on there. The last thing that was brought to my attention for change and modification was the fact that we had provided for animals that are at a CCS certified artificial insemination facility, and that they needed to be actually a resident and enrolled in the facility in order to qualify it. As I understood it, there are some that can go to the facility that are not actually enrolled and a resident and therefore shouldn't have the status. So this was intended to clean up that. The last thing was to note, as Dr. Ellis had noted, that untested bulls could go out of state and go to a feed yard where we had a trichomoniasis certified facility agreement with them to take these kind of animals. It keeps them within the slaughter chains and reduces our risk. And it's also how we handle them in-state, which makes for consistency on the part of our inspectors. So, if you have any questions.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 51 entry requirements located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register for a 30-day comment period.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 12G, Chapter 59, General Practices and Procedures. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Gene, before we go to item G, are these fee for certificates of veterinary inspection, are they broad-based as several different species?
It was just simply a hike one.
Is it several different species?
Every species.
Anybody would use it.
I want to clarify that there are some, we're talking about fees now. The fee under item G is broad-based. If you look specifically at B, C, and D, they were species specific, and I just felt as chairman that it's important that when we do discuss, if and when we do discuss fees, that it is important to have all of our species at the same time after we've diligently worked through the process and come up with what those fees should be. So that, I just want to clarify my reasoning. So go ahead, Gene, with item G.
All right, what I bring to you today is a proposal in our Chapter 59, which is General Practices and Procedures. Basically, this was our fee section for our Certificate of Veterinary Inspections. As the Commission's well aware, back in 2004, we had gotten a specific fee authority for the health certificates and had established them at $5. As Chairman noted, they go across all the species and include the equine passport. I think Commissioner Ebbison had asked the question, we were discussing it last time. There was a fee, and there is. Our equine passport is issued by us. It also is subject to the same fee. So with it, this was just a proposal as requested to bring forward for that option for the Commission. As Dr. Ellis noted, any rule, any fee takes 2 Commission meetings with a 30-day comment period. So at this point.
I should clarify, give me just a second to tell y'all, there's 3 kinds of health certificates right now. We sell them. This is proposing to sell our papers going from $5 to $7. There's a company called Global Vet Link that sells them online, electronic. They're a very good company. We work well with them. They charge $4, and then they collect our $5, so they would collect our $7, so that would cost $11 for a health certificate. USDA has an online electronic health certificate. They don't charge, and they won't collect our fee either one. So we have to bill. They tell us who bought them, and we have to try and collect. So I just want to let y'all know, one of the challenges moving forward is going to be with this agency in the next 2 or 3 years as we address the disease traceability. We're going to probably have to go to I believe within 2 or 3 years, you guys will be asked to require health certificates to be electronic, or otherwise we'll have to hire data entry people, or we have to charge a lot more money because we're going to need that seamless integration of the movement information into a database. So with that said, this may be the most expensive health certificate in the United States. I didn't call all 50 states, but I'm pretty sure if it's not, we're right up there. So just giving you that as a background, and I think you're going to see health certificates back on the agenda in the future because of some of our data issues and electronic needs for electronic. And we'll have to decide as a staff, do we create our own internal electronic health certificate, or do we just say use those 2 that are out there? Tennessee just last week created their own, and we're going to kind of watch how they did theirs and see if it works, and maybe we can steal it. But our challenge is computer folks and IT resources and expertise need to be created and maintained and support these. So just a little background for y'all on this issue.
And again, these are proposed, right?
Yeah, this is a proposal.
On the permits on the bulls that are coming in, is there a charge for those permits?
No, not right now. Of course, we've never done it before. But,
and the permit's just
that'll be up, that's, inspection fees.
Right.
Absolutely, y'all may want to consider that at some point, but right now we don't charge. We don't charge for anything right now, but health certificates without registration, that's it.
This money from the fees goes to general revenue?
Yes, other than what's reappropriated back to, there's a certain amount that comes to us, the rest goes to the state.
The only thing we get is about registration, everything else goes into general revenue, and they would credit us back. We asked the question, we first asked the question, you already have a fee for health certificates, can we get credit towards that? As LBB recommended, raise fees, and I said, no, you gotta raise new fees. So this would be considered, so we then asked, will we get credit for this if you raise the amount? And they said yes.
For the whole amount?
No, just the new amount. So, but it doesn't come to us, it goes to the general revenue, and then they give us credit. They give it back, they give it to us up front, and then we pay them back. Does that make sense? They'll appropriate our money for the biennium, and then we'll have to make payments. Basically, we're borrowing money and paying it back with fees, and if we don't make the payments, at some point, they would de-appropriate the agency rate.
Just curious, how much does this generate in a year?
150,000, is that it? Is that right, Matt?
150,000, yeah. He's regarding this physical note for this.
If you look at the 3rd page of the document I gave you, it actually down in the bottom right corner shows you, we just guessed how many were cattle health certificates and how many were horses, and actually went in and gave credit for each species for that amount. And you can see that figure on the 3rd page of the statistics.
That health certificate actually pays 2 things. It pays for the health certificate and then all the major stock shows and are where a lot of those sales certificates are written to. And the rodeos and those are paying the inspectors that are standing in front of the stock shows and standing in front of those ropings and you know, checking those papers.
And Dr. Vickers is not here, but I will tell y'all that he was supportive of this and discussed it.
He's the one
He was supportive.
Any further discussion? Have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we propose the amendment to section 59.11, certificate of veterinary inspections located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move the notice of the proposed amendment be noticed in the Texas Register with a 30-day.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 12G, Chapter 59, General Practices and Procedures. Any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Sorry to keep interrupting, Gene, but when we go to item 13, these are proposals that we approved as a commission last commission meeting without the knowledge that we have today. Dr. Ellis, did we have any, or Gene, did we have any public comment on these?
The only one that we received comment was on the fowl registration, on exotic and domestic fowl registration, and it was from the Texas Poultry Federation, just supporting the overall
Supporting
fee.
it?
Yes, those fees, as Dr. Ellis noted, is one of the 2 fee programs that we currently have, and they established the funding to support the program. And they'd been in place for 6 years, and so so other than that, there was of the 2, you know, first one was the chronic wasting disease. You know, you want me to go ahead and go?
Go, continue then. I'm sorry.
Chapter 40. First, I bring you the adoptions we have today. Is the chairman noted, 2 will be fee-based. First one's Chapter 40, chronic wasting disease. This one provided for a $100 per hour fee to be assessed for the inventory of chronic wasting disease, annual inventory. As the program requires that there is an annual inventory submitted, historically the producers have used us to perform that, or they've paid a vet. Though more folks have used us because we were free. As such, we established a fee that was in accordance with most of the standards out there, $100 an hour, and we didn't get any comments back. So as such, what I bring to you was the original proposal of $100 an hour.
One comment on that. I did receive comments on that from some members of the service industry as recently as within the past 4 days, 5 days. They had agreed initially when this came about. They're still in agreement. They don't like it, but they understand the need and they're supportive.
So with that, if you don't have any questions, I bring to you this for adoption.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we adopt the amendment of Chapter 40, chronic wasting disease located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 13A, Chapter 40, chronic wasting disease. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioner, what I bring to you, the second rule set is actually on Chapter 49 for equine. This is actually some requirements that's come out from our pyroplasmosis program and the issues related to that. This was providing, the real proposal was providing, in fact, what an actual official test was, how it was to be identified in terms of tests, also using the right tested document. We did create a standardized test document, which is very helpful in terms of evaluating the test information, ensuring that everything is consistently provided in a manner that gives us to handle these horses. Also, too, went ahead and defined what a reactor was, so we know that we had a horse that showed itself to be a positive, that we'd set the standard. And with that we also set and put in place that there shall be a test requirement for those that participate in at a racetrack facility, in order to try and manage and control these out of participation in those events, because we've found quite a few. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendment to Chapter 49 Equine located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 13B, Chapter 49 Equine. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commission, the next rule that I bring to you is adoption for Chapter 51. This entry requirements, this is specific to the entry requirements for the equine passport. As Dr. Ellis had discussed at the last meeting, there is a collaborative effort among the southern states to recognize a standardized equine passport. As such, we were making modifications to our rule to recognize that specific group of passports that's done by the southern states and stuff. As such, it was clarifying what was required to be brought in with that, what that would allow them to do. And as we noted earlier too, that is one of the 3 documents that would qualify for the fee under the current certificate of veterinarian service, as well as any increase would also cover that particular item. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move we adopt the amendments to Chapter 51 entry requirements located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Been moved and seconded that we approve item 13C, Chapter 51 entry requirements. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioner, I bring you the last rule adoption for your consideration today. This also is a fee consideration. This is for our exotic and fowl, domestic fowl registration program. These are for producers who sell off-site from their location, typically at locations such as flea markets. Established in 2004, this is an adjustment to bring that program more in line with the fee support necessary to support the program. As Dr. Ellis noted, this is one of those that we have a fee for, and the money goes to supporting the program. I can say this is one of the where we're actively out there going to these the locations, markets, flea markets, inspecting these people and making sure that they do have their registration. So it's a very active area of surveillance for us that does provide a lot of risk reduction for these types of diseases. So once again, the only comment that we did receive was from the Texas Poultry Federation that did support these fees. So,
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 54, Domestic and Exotic Fowl Registration, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second. Been moved and seconded that we approve item 13D, Chapter 54, Domestic and Exotic Fowl Registration. Any further discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Gene, thank you. Thank you. I do not have any public comment, so we will move to item 15. And I hate to keep sounding like a broken record, but I always like to accomplish things, but it feel like we're not accomplishing a lot today. But when we know a little bit more from the Hill, what my plan is to get to work individually with industry leaders. Our industry is again supportive. The commissioners who represent these industries will go to work and hopefully in the summer we can plan a meeting with a good specific agenda where action can be taken or proposed, and then another meeting prior to September 1st. And what we'll do, Dr. Ellis and I will start looking at dates and get that out to the commissioners. And it might be short notice, but we're going to do the best we can.
When's the session end?
When does it?
Which one? May 31st.
May 31st. So this
unless
There will be a special session, won't there, because of the education bill that happened last night?
Yeah, they're reporting that they may well have to, that there's a supplemental piece that they need to pass in order for the budget bill, and that without it, they have to go to a special session.
Well,
And it just depends on when they choose to schedule it.
all I can say is that I will persevere. We will do our best. We've got a great staff. I think that we are at the realization where we're going to have to make some cuts that we're making, and we'll move on. So, Dr. Ellis, are you good with that? Would you work on that meeting maybe June, mid-June, late June? I don't know. But there's going to be a lot of work needs to be done prior to that meeting. So we're not going to look at a date right now. Okay? If there's nothing else, then I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
He's taking a week off.
We're right here.
Okay.